Welcome, everybody. I am Joe Cole, Associate Professor of Restorative Justice at the Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite University. I'm so glad that you are joining us for this Zaire Institute webinar and conversation with Kay Pranis and Samuel Johann about using circles to support individual and community mental health in a climate disaster. I also want to give a big thanks to Corey Schaefer, our Director of Programs at the Center for Justice and Peace Building, for his work in shepherding our live streaming experience today. In just a moment, we'll get to the conversation between Samuel and Kay, and then after that, we'll have a Q&A session and then announcements before we close. I'd like to introduce Samuel. He's been working with international crises involving armed conflicts, disease outbreaks, natural disasters, and collective trauma for the last 10 years, primarily as a humanitarian coordinator for Doctors Without Borders. He is responsible for access, negotiation, and dialogue with governments, armed groups, and community leaders, as well as the safety and leadership of multinational and multidisciplinary teams. Samuel has led humanitarian responses in 10 different countries, including Afghanistan, Yemen, Mozambique, and most recently in the West Bank and Gaza. He has been trained as a peacemaking circle keeper and instructor by Kay Pranis, with whom he undergoes a continuous mentoring process. Since 2022, in his home country of Brazil, Samuel uses circles across different peacebuilding and conflict transformation initiatives in contexts of violence and trauma, aiming to support community leaders, prison staff and residents, and frontline workers. Samuel is particularly interested in innovation and intersections between public safety and public health, has a taste for improbable encounters, and dreams of a world where all forms of violence are replaced by dialogue, including in crisis situations. Kay Pranis teaches and writes about the dialogue process known as peacemaking circles. Kay learned about peacemaking circles in her work in restorative justice in the mid-90s. From 1994 to 2003, Kay held the position of restorative justice planner at the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Her initial teachers in the circle work included Barry Stewart, a judge in Yukon, Canada, and Mark Wedge, a member of the Tagish Tlingit First Nation. Tahanaka Yako has been an important ongoing member of her practice. Since that initial exposure to the use of peacemaking circles in the criminal legal system, Kay has been involved in developing the use of peacemaking circles in schools, social services, churches, families, museums, universities, municipal planning, and workplaces. Kay has authored or co-authored several books about circles, which can be found by scanning this QR code. Kay has a particular interest in the use of circles to support social justice efforts addressing racial, economic, class, and gender inequities. That interest includes the use of peacemaking circles to understand and respond to historical harms to groups of people. The peacemaking circle process has been a source of energy, inspiration, and continuous learning for Kay for the past 25 years. Viewers, please remember to submit your questions as we listen to Kay and Samuel. Please feel free to type them in the chat as they arise, and we'll circle back to them during the Q&A. Kay and Samuel, welcome, and I'm now going to turn it over to you.
Unmute. I'm so happy to be here. Welcome, everyone. It's such a privilege to be here, to come together in this beautiful community, to notice what is hopeful as we grapple with very unsettling changes in the world around us. I invite everyone to take a deep breath and to follow your breath consciously for a bit. I want to acknowledge the land that holds each of us in its embrace of gravity, the rocks and waters of the land each of us is on, the plants and animals of that land, the air that creates a cushion around the land. I also want to acknowledge the original caretakers of the land we are each on, and all those who have walked on the land since, and all our ancestors. In these acknowledgements, we remember that we are part of a web that goes to the past and to the future in every direction in the present. As part of that web, we are never alone. And as part of that web, we have responsibility for our impact on every other part of the web. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being. Our focus today will be on how we can use the web I spoke of to support our individual and collective mental health and promote resilience through the traumatic challenges of climate disasters. Responding with Circle soon after sudden disaster or threat is not new. Over the years, I've heard of various situations where circles were used in the wake of a traumatic event. A colleague in Minnesota, Alice Lynch, used circles in schools in North Minneapolis after a tornado destroyed thousands of structures and resulted in 2 deaths in the neighborhood in 2011. My friend Katya in Mexico facilitated her first circle when a yoga class was interrupted by gunfire outside the building in 2012. Katya conducted circles with children in a shelter after the earthquake in Oaxaca, Mexico. So this idea is not new. What we want to explore today is a conceptual framework that can help us be more systematic in recognizing the role circles can play in disaster response, and to share some learnings from an effort to move beyond isolated, spontaneous use of circles in disasters. Samuel will do most of the talking. Though I have done many trainings in Brazil since 2010, which is an important element I will come back to later, I did not meet Samuel in Brazil. Samuel and I met because of COVID. He participated in a virtual training for advanced skills for circle keepers in 2021. Later, he contacted me as he was expanding his work in circles, seeking to become a trainer. And again later, he sought my feedback as he was conducting circles in a prison and wanted to bring rival gang members together. It is in Samuel's direct experience that the world of circle and the world of humanitarian disaster response come together to strengthen both. I asked Sam to do this webinar because I feel it's very important to recognize the power of non-clinical community support for mental health, which is the great gift of Circle, and to identify partnerships we can make with other conceptual frameworks that extend our own understanding of the work that we do. Thanks so much to the Zaire Institute, and especially to Corey Schaefer and Joe Cole for their support and engagement in bringing this moment to you. I pass the talking piece to Samuel.
Thank you, Kay. And thank you, Joe and Corey, also for the support. Very, very happy to be here. Very nervous as well. And I want to apologize for my very thick Brazilian accent and my limited English. I hope it doesn't compromise communication. And Kay, please, in case at any point I am out of words or I mispronounce something critical or I forget to say something that you consider very important, please feel free to jump in anytime. Can we have the first slide? Okay. Yep. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that this response to a disaster using circles was a collective effort. It would not have been possible without courageous people and courageous institutions. I would spend the whole webinar just honoring everybody involved, so that's not possible, but there are a few names that I want to mention here. I imagine some of them are watching us right now, and I want to say it's a very, very big responsibility for me to be representing the beautiful work that you have done and you continue to do. I want to acknowledge Leoberto and Ajuri's team. They are the foundation of Circle in Brazil, and we are lucky that they are located in Rio Grande do Sul state, the southernmost state in Brazil, where I also live, and the state that was struck by its biggest natural disaster in history last year. I want to honor the work of Tanya, Priscilla, and the colleagues of Pact Lajeado for Peace. They don't act in the whole state, but they act in the region where the disaster struck first. And we were very blessed that they had trained hundreds of circle keepers in that region. It would not have been possible to mobilize capacity because there would not be capacity if it wasn't for Tanya, Priscilla, and their team. I want to honor Raquel, a very, very important circle keeper and instructor in Brazil, who lives in a neighbor city of mine. She's the one who triggered us into trying to organize something and be more cohesive. In the aftermath of the first big flood that we had, she was called to support a school community and provide care to 200 teachers at the same time. And that's when we stopped and thought, okay, we have to organize ourselves. We need to create a framework. We cannot continue to do things in isolation here and there. So I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Raquel, for sure. Also, Deborah and Sejusk team, also from my city, Lajeado, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. Sejusk is an institution inside the justice system. It's the Center for Citizenship and Conflict Resolution. And they were the first institution that jumped along with us in our effort to use circles in an organized and larger scale way facing a natural disaster. It was a big risk that they took supporting us in such uncertain situation. And we are extremely thankful for everything that they have done. Also, Veronica and Alvaro from Doctors Without Borders team, the organization that I work for sometimes. I was not working for Doctors Without Borders when the floods came into our region. Veronica is lives in the same city as I do. It's a small city of 100,000 inhabitants in the countryside of Rio Grande do Sul state. She's the only other person who works with Doctors Without Borders in our region, as far as I know. And she took the lead within the organization to help respond to this disaster, and she supported enormously to create the interface between the circle keeping world and the restorative justice community, and the world of disaster management, let's say, the humanitarian responses to disaster. Also Kay, of course, who was with us all the time, giving us remote support as soon as telecommunications were possible again. There's a picture of Kay on the left of the screen when she was visiting one of the destroyed cities a few months after the disaster, of course. Flor Garcia Mencos, who is in the center on the top. She's a Central American circle keeper and instructor. At the time, she was the only one that we could trace that had used circles in a situation that had some similarities with the disaster that we were living. And she gave us very, very, very valuable insight. And of course, all the frontline workers and the volunteer keepers who helped us, who helped the whole community, the whole state during a moment of shock. And I want to acknowledge these people because they were courageously working in the front line while they were themselves affected by the disaster. So that takes a lot of courage. Also, I want to acknowledge that everything that we did, and we're going to talk about, we're going to spend some time on the framework that we developed. That's all experimental. We don't claim to be specialists in anything. And we welcome critical thinking. We welcome skepticism. We need to continue to refine our ideas and put our ideas to test. And lastly, before we move to the content itself, I've been working in the world of disaster for 10 years. But nothing can prepare you when disaster strikes you at home, when it's your community, when it's your neighbors, when it's your city. There's no technical preparation for that. So if at any point of the presentation I get a bit emotional or I lose track of something because I'm traveling in my memories, I apologize. Be compassionate towards me, please. So instead of describing the disaster that we faced, which led us to develop the framework which we are here to present, I thought it was quicker and more effective to share a video that there are many videos on international news. So I chose kind of randomly one of them a few days after the big flood that hit our state in May 2024. It's a video. I don't remember the channel you will see, and it's while the humanitarian response was still being built and the disaster was still unfolding. But I think it gives you a sense of what we were going through. So it's a 3-minute, 3 minute video. So Corey, if you want to go for the video.
Now, at least 83 people are dead after days of heavy rain in southern Brazil, and more than 100 are missing. Another 122,000 people have been displaced by floods, which have destroyed roads and bridges in several cities, triggered landslides, and caused a dam to partially collapse. The governor of Brazil's Rio Grande do Sul state has described it as being in a war scenario. It is the 4th time they've been hit by flooding in the last year. Aisha Tull has more.
This is what days of pounding rain has done to the southernmost region of Brazil, the city of Canoas, just outside the state capital. Boats having to replace cars, and helicopters becoming a small beacon of hope as people await rescue. A body-worn camera captures the moment a soldier uses a brick to break the roof of a house to free a baby trapped by floodwater. A scene now too familiar for the people of Rio Grande do Sul, as the military and volunteers frantically race to save others who need help.
I am 53 years old, and this is the first time our house is flooded. It has never flooded before. We never thought we would go through this.
At least 80 people are known to have died, more than 100 are still missing, and over 100,000 can't return home.
I need a lot of help, a lot. We have nowhere to sleep and nothing to eat. We have nothing.
It's very difficult. I almost drowned. The guy who saw me pulled me into the boat because I couldn't.
Almost everyone in the region has a story of rescue, survival, and sadly, loss. The Brazilian president flew over the affected areas with members of his cabinet promising help from the national government.
I put all of them on my helicopter. We came here so that we could have a glimpse, get the extent of the flood, together with the governor. So we saw the damage that the rain is causing and has already caused.
Last week, the president described the floods as being the largest Brazil had ever seen. Never before had so much rain fallen in one single location, he said. Weather across South America is currently being affected by the phenomenon of El Niño, which warms surface waters and causes intense rainfall in the south of Brazil and drought in the north. But scientists say the extreme weather is happening more often because of human-caused climate change.
Unfortunately, droughts and floods will occur more frequently and will often lead to unprecedented situations that can lead to these disasters.
More rain is forecast in the coming days. A state of alert has been reissued, with no respite in sight for the towns and cities already submerged in record-breaking floodwater.
So if we can go back to the slides. That's the map of my state, Rio Grande do Sul state, the southernmost state of Brazil. We were struck by two very, very large floods in a window of 8 months. The first one in September 2023, and the other one in April, May 2024. The one of September 2023 was the biggest flood that we had faced, I don't remember exactly, in the last 70 or 80 years, and one of the largest in our history. And then the one that came in April, May became the largest natural disaster that our state has ever seen, and one of the biggest in Brazil for sure. The idea of using circles to respond to needs on the ground came up after the one in September 2023, literally on the second or third day of the flood. And the framework that we are going to describe was born there, and the first experimentations were done there. And our successes, mistakes, and lessons learned gave a foundation for a larger scale intervention in the whole state that took place when the second flood came, and where 95% of the municipalities of the state were affected in one way or another. So just to contextualize, floods are not they are not unusual in our state. But this time, the level of the river was 20 meters above normal, which is completely unimaginable. You had complete cities completely underwater, and entire areas of cities destroyed by the force of the water. The capital city of our state was also underwater, which hindered enormously the logistical capacity of any response. And reinforced the sense of isolation that everybody was feeling, which was also reinforced by the lack of telecommunications. So no internet for a long period of time in some places. And if you can go back one slide, just with the numbers. The numbers that we have more than 2 million people affected by the second flood, more than 500,000 displaced, and more than 200 killed. And the only reason we didn't have more people killed in the flood of 2024 is because people are already very scared and traumatized by the one in 2023, and more prepared as well. Otherwise, the death toll would have been much, much higher. If you can go one slide. Yeah, like I said, in some cases, we had the water rising up and swallowing places and covering rooftops. But that's it. And in other cases, if you can go to the next slide, and the next, in some areas, it just swept away. The force of the river swept away entire neighborhoods and important chunks of cities, leaving nothing for people to go back to. If you can go one more slide. So as the water started to recede, people were starting to understand what they were going back to, when there was something to go back to. The shock or the struggle for survival was replaced by the shock of trying to understand what life would be and what was left of our communities. There is one photographer in the south of Brazil called Carolina Leibniz. She was very, very skilled in capturing the soul of what people were feeling, not from the air, but from the ground. She was very, very, very competent in capturing the confusion regarding our sense of agency and power, sense of belonging to community, to place, the confusion around the sense of meaning that was going on. And she gave me permission to share those pictures here. So I selected some of these pictures and I would like to share them to bring the idea of collective trauma and resilience to the ground. So it's a few pictures and we will be showing each picture for 2 seconds and we're going to watch them in silence. So it's going to be a 2 or 3 minute picture section. And as you look at those pictures, I would like to invite you to imagine not only you see some images, but try to imagine what else was going on around us in terms of sound and smell. The deafening sound of the helicopters, still trying to rescue people or provide humanitarian relief, the sound of the rain, the smell of mud, the smell of garbage, and many other elements that were going on around us. So as we invite you to watch those 2-3 minute presentation in silence, we want you also to pay attention to your breath, to sit comfortably, and to allow yourself to feel whatever those pictures evoke in you. So at that stage, in the immediate aftermath of that, or during what you just saw, there were 4 key variables in front of us. The first one, there was a clear need. And many circle keepers, myself included, were being called to support, especially within the school community, where circles have a long history of presence in our region. The second variable, there was a motivated circle keeping community that wanted to do something, that was ready to do something. The third variable, we had people on the ground with substantial experience working in natural disasters, myself included in that bunch, but a few others. And number four, there were institutions, courageous institutions. And then again, I want to mention CEJUSC, the Center for Citizenship and Conflict Resolution, CEJUSC Lajeado from my city, and a Juris, an institution, a restorative justice institution from the whole state that were ready to back us up and to support us. And we wouldn't have moved very far with legitimacy if we didn't have institutions backing us up at that point. So those variables at hand, we wanted to stop doing scattered stuff and create a cohesive framework, where to look, what to do, how to put your brains together in the middle of an emergency state where you don't have a lot of time to look, but also you want to do things that are strategic. You don't want to add up to the existing mess. So the first thing to look at, there is a very important document, and the title of the document is there on the screen. The UN has a committee called the Interagency Standing Committee, or abbreviated as IASC. It is the highest level humanitarian coordination forum in the United Nations system. And they produce different guidelines. Their guidelines for mental health support in an emergency situation was produced in 2007 and has been a very, very important map for humanitarians to assess mental health needs on ground and to design responses. We were also lucky that we had a team of Doctors Without Borders on the ground who used this framework in different mental health interventions, and they supported us by exploring the different maps and possibilities and see where Circle could fit. There were two key aspects, at least in my mind, about where circles could fit. Where do they fit in the space of the humanitarian response to a disaster? And where do they fit in the time of the humanitarian response to a disaster? So the picture that you have in front of you is a picture that tries to describe the space. I understand that the content is in Portuguese, my language. This picture was taken during one of the discussion presentations that we were having, where Doctors Without Borders was presenting the basics of mental health in a disaster for the restorative justice community of my region. And a very interesting way to think of the space of a mental health intervention in a disaster is to look at this pyramid. We call it the IASC pyramid, and it is divided in 4 layers, as you can see. I understand it's in Portuguese, but I will mention the name of each layer in English. The base layer in blue is called Basic Services and Security. So here we're talking about rescue, shelter, food, water, protection from harm. It is very, very important to keep that layer in mind, because it reminds us that every component of humanitarian relief adds up to the mental health response. So even things that you don't consider mental health, they have a huge impact on mental health, and they can allow or hinder mental health efforts. Then you have the second layer in purple, support to community and families. Then you have the third layer in green, non-specialized focused support or focused non-specialized support. So this is more targeted support to certain audiences, but you're not talking about specialized services. You're not talking about one-to-one. You're not talking about clinical work. Clinical work comes on the top of the pyramid. which reads specialized services. So one slide further, you will see, and you will probably reach the same conclusion that we did, that circles could fit the map of the intervention within the second and the third layer of the pyramid. We don't do clinical work with circles. We don't do one-to-one work, and that's a realm for people who are highly trained. Also, we don't rescue people and we don't build shelters. So our space is in the middle. If you can go to the next slide. So I just pasted this from the original document, which, by the way, is online and free for anybody in the world. It's available in several languages, this guideline for mental health support in disaster settings. And I just pasted here as well, if you can go to the next slide, some session on the second layer of the pyramid, community and family support. And I highlighted a few things that felt important for me. And I imagine that you can read them. I hope they are not too small. So when you look at the second layer of the pyramid, the bottom line here, the bottom line is that circles can be used to help communities regather or stay together in a healthy way amidst the disaster. It can be a tool that existing networks, youth groups, churches, neighborhoods, school communities can use to do several things, to process what's going on together, to find strength, to go through the routines that they strangely need to carry on even during a disaster situation, but that's how it is. It can help communities also to identify needs and take collective action towards those needs. Not to mention, it is an organized breathing space in general. So there's a lot that Circle can do to contribute to the humanitarian response at this level of the pyramid. And then on the next slide, I pasted some words on the third layer, the focused, non-specialized support. The bottom line here is that circles can be applied within more targeted groups, more specific groups, to meet more specific needs that those groups might have. In here, just mentioning two of them, which we were able to support in the aftermath of the disaster. Using circles for the school community to process and to offer care for the colleagues who lost their houses during the flood, for instance. So it's a targeted group, it's a specific need, and you want to process that. Another example of what was done, offering a moment of decompression for the frontline workers who, in a situation like this, they are already on their knees. They have no perspective on when they will need to stop working. They provide essential services. A lot of people depend on them, and they need to be strong for everybody all the time. So the circles can be a decompression moment for this type of audience. If you can move forward to the next one. Yeah. So one way to try to summarize the potential of Circle as part of the mental health response in a disaster setting is, this is not a formula. This is just the way we decided to present it, but we decided to present 4 aspects. Help people process the stress energy within a supportive and safer environment than what they are experiencing around. Help people reactivate existing social emotional resources. And we understand how critical it is that people activate or reactivate their social emotional resources, because this can prevent the development of mental health pathologies along the way and add into the public health burden. Number 3, reinforce people's sense of agency, connection, and meaning. So at least in my mind, as we design things, as we apply, as we kept the circles, as we gather testimonies from keepers, from participants, this notion of a triangle of three needs comes very strongly to my mind. The sense of agency, meaning the sense of power. People being able to understand that even if they cannot change the larger scenario, they are making a lot of small decisions every day. They are taking care of people who are on their left or on their right. They can still make decisions. And we understand the sense of agency and power is a fundamental human need, which is in some cases destroyed, shattered, or at least strongly affected by disasters of this magnitude. Sense of connection to the community, connection to place, connection to self as well. It's very common that people disconnect from themselves, from their bodies. They dissociate, and the sense of meaning, the sense of finding meaning that allows us to carry on. And by that, we don't mean denying the hard reality, but finding collectively meanings that help us go to a better place while grieving and acknowledging the pain that we went through. And number 4, prevention of mental health pathologies, as I mentioned in point 2. And also identifying people who might need specialized support that goes beyond what Circle can do, but we can at least refer people to somebody who can assist them with their specific needs. So if you can go back, just stay on that slide for a second. If you look at this potential assets that the Circle is in a disaster situation, you will see there is nothing new. This is what Circle does. This is what Circle is designed to do. There's nothing extraordinary here. There's nothing new under the sun. What gives me reassurance and what supported my community at that point is to be able to frame circles within prior frameworks that make sense to humanitarian actors, that can give us legitimacy when we are explaining things to other institutions or even to the people who we are serving, and also who can gives us some internal safety as we struggle with our own questions, our own uncertainties in such a volatile situation, and our own fears as well. But then the question of time remains, the use of circles and the time of the intervention and what role they could play. So next slide, please. This also is just a quick picture that was taken during the first trainings and discussions in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. It's in Portuguese, I will explain. And there are different ways actually to present the phases through which human beings' emotional experience will navigate after deep trauma or after disaster. This is one way to look at it. It's not the only one, but this three-phase approach is the one that was offered by Doctors Without Borders at that point, and we want to honor what they offered, and our reflections came from that model. So you see the first column is 72 hours, acute phase. Immediately after, in our case, immediately after the waters rose and places were destroyed, the water is receding, people have very, very, very strong stress reactions. You will have people freezing. You will have people going to apathy. You will have superheroes emerging. People becoming superheroes for a full days before they collapse again. Very, very strong reactions that we should consider completely normal, given the abnormal circumstance that they are facing. So we don't want to medicalize these reactions. Then, as soon as a sense of routine starts, let's say I have been rescued in the roof of my house. I don't know exactly what happened to my house, but I already found my children again, some relatives, and I am now living in a shelter. And I have life sucks, but I have 3 meals a day, and I have a roof to protect me from the rain. As soon as some routine is established, people start entering what is called the assimilation phase, characterized by acute stress related to the threats that I link to the event. So in our case, whenever rain started again, people would show very strong stress signs. When people would watch the news, when people would see the river, that's the characteristic of that phase, which then slowly leads to, after 3 months, according to this framework, but this is a map, this is not a formula, it's just a map, people might enter a chronic phase, where the high stress should have been gone because the event is gone, but the stress is still there. This is where clinical language that don't belong to the circle world starts appearing, like PTSD, and you start, because the surroundings are back to normal, but the person is still highly affected. You can see more clearly the symptoms of the acting in and acting out cycles that we study when we explore trauma. I want to acknowledge that this is a heavy medicalized view of the human emotional experience, and that it focuses on the disease, it focuses on the problem. It says nothing about people's strength, people's resources, people's capacity to cope well in a healthy way. But it is an important map to tell us what can go wrong and what we can expect in terms of public health. In fact, we know that there will be a burden in terms of public health, at least in the mental health part, after a disaster, because you cannot support everyone. But the more interventions we can do to support people keep and build healthy relationships, healthy support networks, exercise their sense of agency and belonging in a healthy way, nurture a healthy sense of meaning, as I explained before, the more we can help reduce this public health burden. But then the question remains, these are the phases. This is one way to look at the different phases, but how do those phases inform the use of circles? So if you can go to the next slide, you see there's a red mark on top. The closer we are from the beginning of the event, we might be in the acute phase or the beginning of the assimilation phase, the more careful we have to be. For this presentation, we decided to share 4 points of care and preparation with you. So the first one is an adaptation to the circle steps or to the circle outline. It's important to remember that at this stage, the stress energy is all over. If the emotional experience was a physical wound, it will be a bleeding wound. So we never felt realistic, to me, to Kay, to anybody involved in designing circle outlines for this situation, to go through the 7 steps, opening ceremony, check-in, building values round, building guidelines round, because people simply don't have the capacity to gather their attention, and the stress is too high. The wound, the symbolic wound is simply open, ugly, and bleeding. So we had to develop a simplified version, which I'm going to share in a few minutes in another slide. The second point of attention is, okay, the aftermath of a disaster, it's not the moment to train people into new things. There's no time, there's no space for that, and we need to take action. So it is the time to mobilize existing resources, yes. But having said that, we felt if we wanted to create a cohesive framework for the keepers in the region to serve the population, we needed to give them some basic training. But here we're talking about a 1 to 2 hour training. We're not talking about very extensive training paths. And what we felt it was important to train people into was PFA, psychological first aid, to help people know above all what not to do, to help the keepers know above all what not to do when they encounter high levels of distress. What type of situation it would be more ideal to refer to a mental health specialist, etc. Psychological first aid, how to show presence, how to be at the presence of a human being who is suffering and be as supportive as possible, and not as much as possible, not disturb the process that the person needs to go through. And the second one is, I wrote here, IASC. I mean, the very, very content that we are sharing here now, the IASC pyramid, where the circles could fit into the space of the intervention, and the different phases of the human emotional experience after a disaster. We felt this was important to train, to share, to raise awareness of, and encourage people to use standardized outlines, standardized in brackets, because circle is always a unique experience. So it's very difficult to talk about standards here, but to try to follow as much as possible what is logical, and what was logical to us when we were reflecting deeply about the process. And again, I'm going to share that in a future slide in 2 minutes. But also allowing the keepers to exercise their creativity and their freedom according to what reality was posing in front of them. Then the third point of attention, when we are trained in circles, we are trained to keep in pairs. We know in reality, in practice, that it's not always possible, although it's always ideal. But in this situation, we really, really wanted to encourage people to keep in pairs. You really want to have a keeper who can tend to the needs of the group, and have a co-keeper who can, in case of need, tend to individual needs that might arise during the circle. And having a professional mental health professional trained on standby. The best image that I have of this was the first larger scale intervention that we did, which I mentioned earlier, where there were more than 200 teachers separated in 14 classrooms. So you had the 28 keepers, 2 keepers per group, keeping circles in the outline that we suggested. And for this action, there was a mental health professional on standby in case things went wrong, in case somebody didn't know what to do. And we didn't need that mental health professional on standby. I cannot recall any situation where that person was needed, but it's an extremely important sense of safety for the keepers. And in case things went wrong, we would have been very grateful to have those people watching our back. Now, when I say that, I dare say mental health professional who has experience in disaster settings, because it is different. It's different from regular clinical work. At the same time, we cannot have everything, and we need to work with the resources that are available to us. And then the last point of care that I want to emphasize is to keep the connection to the existing services for information, but also for referral. We know that the acute phase of a disaster is characterized by a lot of mess, by chaos, lots of people doing different things, not willing or not able to communicate. A lot of goodwill, but very little coordination. And you don't have a lot of coordination capacity even in the first hours or in the first days. In my world of working in disaster, we call these first days the phase of the humanitarian circus, or the moment where we are running around like headless chickens. So it is important that circles don't add into the mess. It is important that the actors, the authorities that are present in that context know what we are doing, why we are doing this, how we are doing this. We want to know the existing services that we can at least mention to people, because there will be needs, mostly related to social services, that will arise during Circle. So you want to keep that in mind, and you want to contribute to coordination rather than hinder coordination. Yeah. So if we can go to the next slide, which is the last one that I will share. This is an attempt to share the simplified outline that we used in the heat of the moment. It is simplified not because the circle is simpler, it's just because we follow less steps. And in my mind, I see this as a U that goes down and then goes upward. And it's divided in two. The first half, the first part, when you are going down the U, you are exploring people's pain. You are allowing organized and safer place for people to explore the impact of the situation and to listen to one another. And then when you go up the U, you are helping people explore hope and explore resources that can only, in many cases, can only be built collectively. The trauma is a collective event, and a lot of resources to deal with it, to cope in a healthy way, will also be collective and not individual. So it's a 5-step outline, starting with an opening ceremony, which can be as simple as 3 deep breaths. The question about exploring pain, if you are in the acute phase or in the beginning of the assimilation phase, in some cases it was simply how are you can trigger how are you, and giving the talking piece to the person on your left or to your right is already enough, because again, the wound is bleeding and the traumatic energy is open, very, very strong at that point. And that will take most of the circle, actually, listening to people's pain. Then to mark the transition, and also to allow people to help that energy flow, we really encouraged a body activity after the second round, which could be something as simple as getting up and stretching, doing whatever your body asks you to do before we sit down again. And the questions of exploring hope and building or rebuilding resources are really related to those 3 senses and human needs that we mentioned earlier: the sense of agency, the sense of belonging, and the sense of meaning. So questions that were used by the keeper community in the south of Brazil at that point include: what keeps you standing? Who are you being helped by? And who are you helping at this moment? What do you want to ask? What would you like to ask? And what would you like to offer to this group and to your peers at this moment? And then a closing ceremony, which in our experience felt intuitively needed to be something with hugging and physical. There is this very natural and strong impulse of people to hug and to express the gratitude for the circle in different ways. Even months after the disaster itself, and here I'm talking about 2024, the big state level response that was done, this outline was very useful. Of course, we could again start with the opening ceremony, checking round values and guidelines. But this idea of exploring the pain and then exploring hope and resources continued walking with us during the storytelling rounds that we conducted. So that was my last slide. Just some closing remarks from my side before I pass the talking piece to Kay. Again, this framework that we used, it was needed for us at that stage. And it's a map. It's just a map. It's not a formula. But it really helped us to find where to look, what to be mindful of, how to frame our language, and how to give minimal safety to ourselves. This was an account of the framework itself. It was not a description of what people did and felt on the ground with the circles. We had hundreds of keepers supporting, and we would need another section and more people to tell that story, and that's their story, not mine. And to mention that the institutions that were backing us up, and I want to mention here again, Sejusc and Ajuris, they gathered impressive numbers. More than 2,500 people sat in circle. Most of those people were part of the school community, but they were also frontline workers and people living in shelters. And I don't have those numbers here. They belong to those institutions, and they don't account for everything because still many people were doing individual efforts at their own level. But I would be very happy to connect anybody interested to those institutions to understand things from a numeric perspective. And I want to close by mentioning what I take as my three main lessons learned of this so far, because it's a continuous process. The first one, I think that in terms of public health in a disaster, circles, they provide a great cost return benefit. You don't need mental health specialists to keep circles, so you can train people faster and you can reach larger audiences if you have more people. I really think it would be a great idea to incorporate circles into the emergency preparedness plans for the disasters that we will continue to face, unfortunately, in our planet. Second point is that there is a very easy trap to fall, which is to fall into the savior's trap. Think that you are there to rescue people with circle. That's not what circles are for, and that's not what's going to help people. It is an empowering tool. It should be an empowering tool. And we have to be very mindful, myself included, not to use the circle intervention as a way to alleviate our need to do something. We have to be strategic about what people need. Last point from myself before I pass the talking piece to Kay. In our case, we intuitively moved into the mental health realm. However, I do believe that there are other aspects of an emergency response where circles could make a big difference. And I'm talking here about management and coordination. We could use circles, or at least use aspects of the circle, such as talking piece, for teams, rescue teams, for example, to organize tasks, gather and mobilize, debrief after critical incidents, for teams of several different sectors to have quick rounds about what's going well and what we need to improve and what we do next. And I dare say, as I moved into the crisis rooms of the authorities that were trying to lead the high impact interventions, I think a talking piece in a crisis room would operate miracles and would help those in power to make better and faster decisions for the benefit of all of us. I do feel that as the world moves more and more towards more frequent and more intense disasters, we also carry the potential to be better and better with each other and for each other. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I pass the talking piece back to Kay.
So I'm going to make one point before we move to questions. And that is that the ability to respond effectively in the acute phase of this particular disaster depended on over a decade of capacity building in using Circle. The development of circle keeping capacity in the state of Rio Grande do Sul started in 2010 when Judge Leoberto Brancher invited me to do 2 4-day trainings in the state. Leoberto brought me back again and again to train more facilitators and to train instructors so that they could do training themselves. Under the organizational structure of Azures, Leoberto promoted the use of circles and training for circle facilitators. Other organizations like Lajeado Pact for Peace also trained facilitators. No one was planning all this training in order to respond to a disaster. But because of the long-term commitment to developing circle keeping capacity, the region was able to respond in a crisis. It's important to train many people, to train people from all walks of life, to train without necessarily knowing how the circle might ultimately be used to serve individuals and communities. And I want to also do a special acknowledgement to Fatima, because Fatima was my voice, is my voice in Brazil. But more importantly, she translated Heart of Hope and Circle Forward into Portuguese so that people in Brazil had access to resources that really helped them to develop this capacity. So I want to honor all of that work that then meant that there was an existing capacity when the crisis happened. And so with that, Corey, turn it over to questions.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Samuel, for sharing your experiences and your insights and your knowledge and wisdom, and Kay as well. We'll now have some time for responding to questions from our viewers and some comments and connections from our viewers. Eunice from Puerto Rico mentions that this reminds them of what happened to their family during Hurricane Maria. We hear from Corinne about the flooding from the hurricanes in Western North Carolina, Hurricane Helene this past September. Also from John, saying that the pictures that you shared look like what was experienced in Western North Carolina during the hurricane last fall. And Heidi mentions the need for this kind of support for survivors of the wildfires in Los Angeles, California. And now a question from Michelle. Can you please repeat the 4 variables that you shared at the beginning, the pre-existing conditions needed to support circle practice, and what do we do if those conditions do not exist?
Do you want me to answer to that one?
Yeah,
Kay?
Sam, that's yours.
Yeah, okay. So a clear need on the ground. And maybe we could add the need is there, but people acknowledging that circles could be a tool that could meet those needs. People with knowledge and experience in circle keeping. People with knowledge and experience in disaster management, because we were really at where those 2 worlds connect, the world of circle and the world of disaster management. And I also added institutions that were willing to back us up and to take risk. And trying already to answer a question that came up, I don't remember from whom, I lost the chat, how this was all coordinated. Institutions were critical for coordination. So again, Sejusk Lajeado coordinated the first more local response in 2023 in relation to other actors and mobilizing people and giving a brand to what we were doing. And in the second case, Ajuris, the institution, at least the Restorative Justice Center of Ajuris, led by Leoberto, who was mentioned by me and by Kay, took the institutional lead together to mobilize and to explain to the rest of the community what was happening. So they were critical for coordination.
I want to say that those 4 criteria to scale up at the level that happened in Brazil. But when I think about Flor Garcia's experience that she shared with us, she didn't have all of those conditions. She worked with what she had and was able to have an impact, and it was important. I think it's the scale of what they were able to do in Brazil that then requires that you have those conditions. But we can always do something within our span of control in a situation like this. But it suggests what are the capacities you need to be developing, right? What do you want to be intentionally developing so that if there's a disaster, these things are already in place? I'm not getting any sound.
I cannot.
Sorry about that. I was
hear.
muted. But we have a comment from Will about circle keepers don't have to be therapists, but they do need skills of trauma responsive restorative communication to co-regulate a distressed person's nervous system and guide them. And then we have a question connected to that. What did support for the circle keepers look like regarding vicarious trauma? And I'm imagining some direct trauma that they were experiencing in their own communities as well.
Yeah. So in our case, in the situation that we were facing, everybody was affected directly or indirectly. It was the only possible subject. Everybody at least knew somebody who was affected. So you didn't have anybody who was disconnected from the environment or who would hear from somebody something that they had not heard before, or they were not at least partly struggling with. And people are also isolated. We were isolated in terms of community telecommunications. There was nobody from the outside who could come to rescue us. So at that point, we did not feel that the risk of provoking vicarious trauma outweighed the potential benefits that circles could offer in that situation. But I acknowledge that is a very legitimate concern. At the same time, and I'm not a mental health specialist, so I do a situation, the one that my state faced in the window of 8 months. It's very collective. You need each other, and I think collective approaches can do much more than individual support at that specific point. Kay, do you want to add?
So as a keeper, you're also a participant in the circle. And so the very process of being with others as a keeper is a part of what I assume it's certainly my experience in far less traumatic situations that if there's a lot of disorder around me, just being in circle, even as a keeper, helps me to regulate. And it's the circle structure itself is responsive to trauma needs, right? Because it's about one of the greatest harms of trauma is isolation. And everything in circle is about connection. It's what the circle is for. And so it's automatically responding to one of the deepest needs that people going through trauma are having, which is the need to belong and to reconnect with other human beings, because we are a social species.
Thank you. We have a question from Zihandula. Were there similar government's initiatives, and what did you do to ensure that the Brazilian government did not see your work as encroaching on their work?
So, the Brazilian government was overwhelmed. One of the advantages of a situation where the government is overwhelmed is that they cannot oversee everything that is happening. But again, because circles were part of the local capacity, of the local culture, and because there were institutions that could respond to the government in case questions came up, this also helped to create some kind of a blanket effect around us and allow us to keep on moving. I would say the overwhelming of the Brazilian government and the institutional support were key, because somebody could have made questions or even tried to block the work, but that never happened.
Thank you. A question from Marcia. Wonderful work. Thanks for sharing. Is there any initiative on support for climate disaster currently in place in Brazil that we can join as circle facilitators? So this is someone who's interested in volunteering and being available when needed.
As far as I know, the institution that we mentioned here earlier, called Ajuris, they are taking some initiatives on climate awareness at the moment. And that is, the scope is not only Rio Grande do Sul state where the disaster happened, but the whole Brazil, and they are doing that in partnership with other institutions. So I think the circle community now is more focused on climate awareness, which is critical as well. I'm not aware of climate disaster preparedness or circles being kept at the moment. But I don't know, Joe, if there is any chance to leave my contact or Kay's contact at the end, and we can certainly link whoever is interested in exploring those topics with some of the key institutions in Brazil who are connected to restorative justice and worried about those topics.
Sure. Would you like us to drop your email in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Is that the best way? Yeah. And Kay too?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Our next question from Alejandra. Can you please repeat the questions you have asked in circles?
Sure. So I think I spend more time talking about the outline during the acute phase or the beginning of the assimilation phase. So when the stress energy was very high, people didn't have their attentional capacity to spend 2-3 hours in circles. They needed to process what was going on. So what I said earlier is that the first half, when we are exploring the pain or going down the you didn't have to ask much. You can ask, how are you? That was a question that I was asking myself when I was keeping circles, but other keepers were free to ask questions that were calibrated to their audience and that made sense to them. Such as, what would you like to share, if anything, about the struggle at this point? I think the point here is that this is not a clinical approach. We're not asking people to recount events. We just want to give people an organized and safer space to share what feels okay for them to share at that point, and you don't want to push anybody's boundaries. And then the second half, when we are working on hope and resources, my 3 favorite questions were I don't know if that's good English, Kay, so you can help, but what helps you keep standing at this point? What keeps you up? What keeps you moving? What gives you hope? Who are you being helped by, and who are you helping at this moment? What would you like to ask from this group or from your colleagues at that moment that would help your journey? And what would you like to offer to help this group's journey? This type of questions.
Thank you. I have a question from Carla. Did you engage in any follow-up support connection activities after the circles?
Thank you for this question. Following the first disaster, which led to this conceptual work, no, not as much as we should. And I think we need to develop some kind of framework for that. People were simply too overwhelmed. And at a certain point, the keepers themselves, they are so tired. And most of the effort, the whole effort was done on a volunteer basis. So you don't have somebody who is there being paid to carry on this work and we should have something like that for X months, for example. A follow-up is needed. I think we did a bit better in following the second disaster in the larger response. That larger response was also not so much focused on the acute phase, but a little bit later. And I think by then people were able to offer more than one circle to each audience. But that's definitely a point that needs to be mature, needs to be explored further. It's a weak, I would say it's a weak point of what we did. And I hope we don't have to do it again, but in case we do, we're going to have to develop that better.
Thank you. Question from Carlos. Dr. Samuel, are there any strategies or words of wisdom for working with someone that embodies the opposite of the principles of restorative practices?
I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physician. I work with a lot of doctors, but my job is to organize humanitarian interventions and enable them so the doctors and the nurses can save lives. I can only talk about my own experience for this question, but if somebody is completely opposite to the principles of circles or restorative justice, and that person will probably not sit in circle with me in the first place. Everything, I'm talking about this specific experience now following this disaster and the response that we built and implemented. We never forced anybody to sit with us. Everything was done on a volunteer basis. Also, people are encouraged to share whatever they feel like sharing, but if silence is an exercise of power for them, they are more than welcome to exercise silence. So leaving people very comfortable to join, leaving people very comfortable to participate to the extent that is comfortable for them is, I think, would be the best approach for somebody who embodies the opposite of the principles of restorative justice. But Kay, maybe you want to answer to that.
No, I think that's fine.
Thank you. I think we've responded to all of our questions, and it's about time for us to close. Okay, Samuel, any final thoughts to share with us?
So yeah, I would say a couple of things. We survive these terrible times collectively, and we survive in relationships. But not all relationships are healthy, and not all collectives serve the larger common good. I think circle is a structure that helps us create the kinds of relationships that allow us to survive with dignity, with hope for the future, and with compassion for others who are not in our collective. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Sam?
I cannot find words to say after this. Thank you. From my side, just to say that we are available. We welcome critical thinking. We want to think further. We want to help out. We hope nobody has to go through this, but if you want to raise capacity before it happens, or if you want to, if you need a hand, if and when it happens, do reach out. We have to operate in community. We are a global circle community, and we are here to help each other. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I just see a lot of gratitude and appreciation expressed in the chat, and I'm feeling that as well. It's wonderful to be here with you all today and listening and learning together. And I just have a few brief announcements before we close out. Our next webinar is March 19th with Crisol Gonzalez and Zaira Magallanes, focusing on Towards a Restorative School Culture, a Restorative Justice Experience in Northern Mexico. Also, stay tuned for more information on the April 30th webinar, which will be focused on trauma and restorative justice. And big thanks to Corey Schaefer, doing a lot of work here behind the scenes, off camera, to keep this thing going today. So thanks so much, Corey, and thanks to everyone who joined in. Take care of yourselves and hope to see you soon.